Hey everyone. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what an argumentative essay looks like if you fill in this template. And years ago when I was teaching essay writing, I thought, wouldn't it be great if we had like a fill in the blank essay, something that was easier to begin than just a full essay, right? Like, how, you can have like short answer, true and false, I don't know, all different kinds of test questions that are easier than just an essay. So I thought, how can we make an essay more like a quiz where your chances are going to be better of success than not? So this was my attempt. So what we have is on the left, if you're given a template, on the left, those are the prompts. Those are the things that are say, do this now, do this now, do this now. And the whole idea is that if you kind of just do what the instructions say, you're going to wind up with an essay that is, decent. Like, hopefully you should at least get like a B. The more you write, the more in depth you go, the more examples you give, obviously your essay is going to be better. But this should get you like at least a passing essay. So if you have no idea how to handle an essay, then this is kind of the idea. So what I tried to do is I tried to find an argument that wasn't comparing two things. Like, it wasn't saying what is better, this or that. It wasn't saying, like this car is the best of all the cars in the world, because I didn't want it to be more of like a comparison essay. And I also tried to find a topic that was hopefully current, interesting, like not a waste of time. Do I necessarily believe what I've written? Parts of it, not all of it. I think it's just, an interesting topic that's worth talking about. So here's what we did is the topic that I picked was nationalism and international borders. And the statement that I'm going to argue in this video is that international borders should be eliminated and countries as we know them should cease to exist. So what I've done is I started with this idea, and then at the very bottom of my introduction, I had to come up with three subtopics. So when I started this, like, I actually originally wanted to film myself doing this so that you could kind of see what it looked like. But that was a bit of a fragmented process. And it would have been a little too long and maybe a little boring, who knows? So I had to think of my topic, and then I thought, okay, like what are three arguments that I could break this down into? And I thought, okay, well, if I'm saying that countries should no longer exist, right? Like, let's just imagine a world with no countries. It's just one world. What are the things stopping us from getting there? So number one is nationalism. This idea that, it's like you're patriotic, you believe in your country wants to advance its own interests. We also have the idea of natural resources that, even if you think your country's best, now how do we share these resources? How do we manage the stuff that we have in the world? And then finally, the United Nations, which seems like, this beacon of hope, but it actually kind of ends up in a way stopping us from doing what we maybe could be achieving, because we're still acting like individual countries. We don't act like a world. Then what I did is I kind of bounced around. I find the first and the last parts of your paragraphs, I find those are the hardest things to write. So I kind of did the middle of all of my paragraphs first on all of these different body paragraphs. And then at the very end, I went through and I put in the more transition statements or the introductory statements, because it's kind of hard to introduce something if you don't really know what you're going to introduce. It's easier to just talk about it and then be like, oh, this is what I'm going to talk about, and do it after. So I'm going to read this to you start to finish, but keep in mind that when I wrote it, I was bouncing around a lot. This probably took me about, 3 hours to type, and it was definitely not start to finish. It was like middle and then the end and then the top and then the middle again. And it was all over the place. And keep in mind, again, I've been writing essays for a long time. I'm not saying that I'm fabulous at them, but I have a lot of experience. And so for me, this was fun and manageable. But in 3 hours on a computer using the internet, trying to find arguments and examples. So it's not exactly easy to pull off an essay in an hour without Google giving you ideas. So cut yourself some slack and know that it's okay to bounce around so long as you've got your whole essay done by the end. So the very first prompt, it says, start with a quote about your topic. I tried to start with a quote from somebody that maybe people would know, or somebody that had quite an impact on the world. I was able to find a quote from Barack Obama, and he said, "We are defined not by our borders, but by our bonds." I liked this quote because it's short, it's clear, and again, it talks about the idea of borders not really being who we are. So next, it says optional, tell the reader who said or wrote the quote and why it matters. So I said, Barack Obama said this in 2010 when the American president welcomed the Mexican president to the White House. I actually could have been clearer about it that he was the American president at the time, but whatever. This quote about mutual understanding and brotherly sameness speaks to the importance of treating each other as equals and not as opponents. Then it says, write an interesting and generic statement about your topic. International borders are political boundaries that are created by people to separate areas and people into groups. The next thing, it says, reword the statement. All you have to do is find synonyms to rephrase what you just said. So I have a country is a nation occupying a specific parcel of territory. The outlines of a country are decided upon by governments, and the separation of these chunks of land are made legally binding. So it's roughly the same thing as what I set up in here. The whole reason why I'm asking you to, reword what you're doing, rephrase it, is just to let the reader sit with it for longer. Because there's nothing wrong with this idea, but if I go into then the next idea, it's like it's too fast. I think it's a pretty good idea. And if we only say it once in one way, it may not sink in with the reader. So that's the whole purpose of rewording it, just so that they hear it again, but in a different way. So write a statement that gives the reader some idea of how important your topic is or how significant it is. So political boundaries, whether real or artificial lines that separate countries, create conditions in which some parts of humanity prosper and others struggle. International borders create both prosperity and oppression. So the whole idea that I want people to know that, it's not just arbitrary. These lines have consequences. Tell the reader your thesis statement. So a thesis statement is basically, if you had to sum up your essay in one powerful line, what is it? It's actually what I've got up here. International borders should be eliminated and countries should cease to exist. That's the essence. That's the one defining idea. That's what your thesis statement is. So I'm actually going to say it very directly. This essay will argue that international borders should be eliminated and countries should cease to exist in an effort to secure world peace. Tell the reader how you will present your thesis statement by telling the reader the 3 body paragraphs which you will discuss. We have to do that for a few reasons. If I don't tell the reader what it is that we're going to do, then everything kind of comes as a surprise. Sometimes surprise can be effective, and sometimes surprise can feel upsetting and startling. And we can have some vocabulary surprises or some wording surprises and some factual surprises, but the direction should not really be a surprise. So I'm going to say to them directly, it is the intention of this essay to argue that political borders should be abolished by examining the following 3 considerations: nationalism, natural resources, and the United Nations. So again, very clear, very direct. Now my reader knows that that is what my essay is talking about, those 3 things. So here's the problem, and this is actually the last paragraph I wrote when I wrote this, was this transition thing. Because technically I've done everything I need to do in my introduction. This body paragraph gives it maybe a little bit of style and a little bit of, let's say, some character to it. So it's not just simply fact, 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 done. An introduction, basically you say what the topic is, and generally you tell the reader what they're going to read about, the 3 body paragraphs. What I've done here is in my body paragraph, I've got something going on. I've got a theme going on. This paragraph is kind of sort of summarizing what I talked about up here, but it's also kind of hinting at what's coming next. I do this so that way it's a smoother transition. Again, imagine you're out with your friends and you're, eating pizza and let's say, like Hawaiian, or you're at a Hawaiian pizza. And you might say to your friends, oh, gosh, I love Hawaiian pizza. It'd be really fun. Let's go to a Hawaiian party, a Hawaiian themed party. And then you make your way to the Hawaiian themed party. There's kind of like a transition, a statement that lets people know, oh, that's how I connected this idea to the next one. You're not just like, we're eating pizza, time to party. Well, I guess you could do that. I don't know. But sometimes it's nice to have that transition so people know why you're going to the next thing. So It says, make a general statement about your topic, which can connect easily to body paragraph number 1, as that's the very next thing which they will read. Now, this is long. I normally don't write such a long transition statement, but I felt like after my first sentence, I hadn't really done what I wanted to do yet. So it actually took me, as you can see, like a number of sentences until I was like, yep, now I feel like I've accomplished that mission. So, with the exception of astronauts, no human on Earth has ever had the chance to experience the world as a single entity, as a single environment. Those of us Earth dwellers are forced to view the world from our own perspective down here within the confines of our own country's political limits. The only existence we have ever known here on planet Earth is from the perspective of someone who belongs to a large and exclusive club with a lifetime membership known as a country. We learn from childhood that some of those clubs are better than others. We are born and raised in a world of borders, walls, military, and protectionism. We live in a system that quite foundationally cannot turn the concept of world peace into a reality. And then this body paragraph is where then I actually talk about nationalism and the idea of like loving your nation and your nation, doing whatever it can to promote itself. And I feel like I made that connection, talking walls, military, some are better than others. Maybe I didn't do it successfully, but I tried. So body paragraph 1, you can see it takes up a whole page. And if I typed this up, this would look like a really nice long essay. The way it's typed up right now, it looks like it's part of a worksheet. But what I would basically do is when I was finished all this, I would eliminate all the boxes, and then all of the paragraphs would just be chunked together. So again, it says we have to introduce stuff in a gentle way. So we say, write an interesting and generic statement about your topic. It's not just something that's like, countries are big. That's almost too generic. It's too young. You need something a little bit deeper than that. So I chose to write, children love to build forts. The next thing that comes instinctively after building the fort is defending the fort. Children learn early on that they need to hunker down, be allegiant to their place, and defend it at all costs. Because I'm trying to, again, create the idea that people can believe in my idea. Whether I believe in it or not is a different issue, but I want people to believe in my idea. And that idea is that we teach people to view themselves as separate from other people. And that we do that in our play, in our games, growing up as children. We learn it. It's ingrained into us. So again, it says, in every body paragraph, it has the exact same instructions. I literally, when I made this template, I copy pasted this 3 times. And so it's the same thing each body paragraph. So then it says, reword the statement. All you have to do is find synonyms to rephrase what you just said. So I said, children grow up learning about possessions, property, and ownership. Ultimately, they grow up learning how to defend what they believe is theirs and only learning to share if it is mutually beneficial. Children grow up learning how to claim. Then it says, directly tell the reader what the topic of the body paragraph is. So I write, it is important to analyze how nationalism directly contributes to an assault on world peace. Because I want, again, keep in mind, my thesis statement is way up here. International borders should be eliminated and countries should cease to exist. And I said in my second body paragraph, my first one, I'm talking about nationalism. And so right here, I have to make it very, very clear that nationalism is one of the reasons why we can't have world peace. So provide an example. World War I and World War II are perfect examples that illustrate how countries sought to support their own individual interests, especially to the exclusion and the detriment of the interests of other nations. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, Russia, Italy, Europe literally went to war over over potential economic and political gains. So then it says to me, explain how the example proves your point. So this is, I'm starting to almost argue now at this point. And I'm saying if separate nations or countries did not exist, then instead of European countries viewing themselves as potential warring nations, they could have seen themselves as allies and citizens of the same land. So I'm basically saying World War I, to a large part, could have occurred because people saw themselves as, I'm this country and you're that country and you're that country. And instead of seeing themselves as all Europeans or all, earthlings, it became you're from this little faction and I'm from this little faction. So explain how the example proves your point. So then I write, if separate nation states or countries did not exist, then instead of European countries viewing themselves as potential warring nations, they could have seen themselves as allies and citizens of the same land. So I think I actually just read that. Oh my gosh, I'm starting to lose my mind here. Make an argument. When groups of people define themselves as being separate, then they treat other groups as different. It then makes it okay to oppress another group of people because then they're defined as being different. So now I have to justify my argument. I'm not making a different argument. I'm not making the same argument. Now I'm almost trying to argue why my argument is correct. And I guess I can do that through clarifying, through adding on other information, through explaining it more. That's how I'm going to attempt to justify it. So I'm going to say if countries did not exist, then people might be more inclined to view themselves as being part of a collective instead of a team or a club that excludes other groups of people. So at this point now, I'm going to give another example because I don't want my whole body paragraph to be based on just one example. So it says, give another example. So another example of nationalism comes in the form of the Olympics. Although the Olympics are meant to celebrate a nation's strength and ability, it also divides people along, usually, ethnic lines. Where did I get to? And creates an us versus them mentality. So explain how the example proves your point. The Olympics are an excellent display of nationalism. Countries waving their banners, displaying their uniqueness instead of sameness with different outfits and accessories while trying to prove that they are the physically superior group of humans. Make an argument. So now this is where I'm going to put it into writing what my idea is. When we compete with others, we create division and rivalry. Even healthy and friendly competition reinforces the idea that we do not work collaboratively with people around the world. We internalize the idea that we dress differently, speak differently, and are somehow better or worse than other people. Our differences are highlighted. So now it says justify your argument. So again, I'm trying to really push my argument home, whether I'm explaining it or clarifying it or adding more details. So I write, nationalism divides people and it is impossible to overcome those differences when we are legally and politically different. So write a statement that gives the reader some idea of how important this argument is or how significant it is. So I write, it is impossible to achieve world peace and through it attacking such things as famine, hunger, disease, poverty, etc. when we create groupings of people and assign them a country to live in. Most people do not get to choose their nationality. They are forced to live in a fractured and hierarchical world. So now I have to tie this back into my thesis statement. And remember, my thesis statement is this thing right at the top that says this is my one defining idea. International borders should be eliminated and countries should cease to exist. So I write, this example perfectly illustrates how political borders and international boundaries keep us from achieving peace. I basically actually just reworded very loosely or very closely actually my thesis statement. And now I make a general statement that connects to body paragraph number 2. Now, body paragraph number 2 is about natural resources. So I want to come up with something that's hopefully going to tie in smoothly, that hints at this body paragraph, but really sums up this paragraph. So I don't know if this worked or not. I feel like it was okay. And I wrote, the way that countries define themselves and provide for themselves will effectively eliminate all possibilities of world peace becoming a reality. So I feel like I tied in the natural resources right here when I said like how they provide for themselves, but I've got the nationality piece right here and how they define themselves. So I feel like including those two little ideas in the same sentence, it kind of helped to unite the two body paragraphs. So now, again, you're going to see it's the exact same thing. Body paragraph number 2, it starts with write an interesting and generic statement about your topic. So the natural resources of the world do not belong to any person, organization, collective, or so-called nation. Bryant McGill is absolutely correct. I have no idea who Bryant McGill is. I found that on Google. I tried clicking. It just came up with something that didn't explain to me at all who he was. Or she, I don't know, whatever. Bryant, I have no idea who this person is. But I really like the quote. I thought it was a very good quote. And I normally actually do not start a body paragraph with a quote. I normally start with like an observation or like a philosophical idea. But for some reason, as I was Googling things, I found this and I was like, oh, this actually, I really like this. This is powerful. So then I have to then reword the statement. So I'm basically taking the idea of what they said and now I'm putting it in my own idea, in my own words. So it is preposterous to believe that a person or a group of people can claim ownership of a natural resource at the exclusion of other human beings. Now, it doesn't have to be word by word. That's not a rule. That's just a suggestion is to reword it. But you're basically trying to say roughly the same thing so that the reader is like, oh yeah, I hear you. So directly tell the reader what the topic of the body paragraph is. So it is important to analyze how natural resources are essential to achieving world peace. Political borders stop us from effectively sharing these resources. So now my reader knows that I'm talking about resources. Okay, the next one says provide an example. Now, again, I know some stuff that happened in the world, but I don't know the exact details. I had to look up the exact year that, the war started. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You're not doing a research essay per se in an argumentative essay, but it's okay to do a little bit of research and get a couple facts so that your essay sounds a little bit more, let's say, forceful. So the example that I want to give about a natural resource, I thought, and again, what I was trying to do here is give not quite a historical example, but I want to talk about fresh water later, but that's a stronger example. So I want to save that for later in the body paragraph. I wanted to start with an example that it's not that it's not as strong, but it's not as imminent, let's just say. So oil has been a source of strife and contention for years. The war in Iraq is a perfect example. If the world population saw themselves as being one, then the world's natural resources would be shared equally too. The war in Iraq is heavily criticized for being a war in which thousands of people died, all to secure oil. So it says, explain how the example proves your point. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, it was under the guise, under the guise of peacekeeping. However, it became clear quite quickly that the real motivations for the war were far more sinister. The United States wanted access to oil. So now I'm going to make an argument. People literally died so that one country could take a natural resource from another country. Justify my argument. So this is where now I'm trying to either explain or clarify or add on to my argument to really push the argument forward. If countries ceased to exist and we belonged to a world population, then instead of seeing, look at all these typos. Instead of seeing the world as us and them, then we would be more inclined to distribute the wealth fairly and willingly. So now I'm going to give another example. All of this was one example. And now I want to give another example so that, number one, my paragraph is longer. And number two, it's stronger because now I've got more going on. So give another example. So fresh water is one of the world's most valuable natural resources. There is speculation that the next world war will be fought over water. So explain how the example proves your point. Canada contains the largest supply of fresh water in the world. National borders stop people from moving from where they are to search out what they need. When the world's water shortage becomes imminent, people could easily move to Canada to access fresh water. However, because of political boundaries, Canada is in a position to either refuse entry of these people or decide not to export the natural resource. So now I'm going to make an argument. If Canada did not exist as a separate political nation from the rest of the world, then the desire to share would be greater. Water hoarding would be minimized. So now I have to justify it. I have to try and prove that my idea is worthwhile. When people feel that they can help out their metaphorical brothers, then they are more willing to cooperate than if they feel like they are being forced to aid their enemies. The natural resource is not the issue. The legal separation of nation states is what pits people against each other. Because I'm trying to make it look as though, if we share well, and I should have actually typed this, if we share well, there's more than enough natural resources for everyone in the world. The problem is that we have some countries that have more access to stuff than other countries, and that's the problem. So write a statement that gives the reader some idea of how important this argument is or how significant it is. So I write, natural resources are essential to survival. Historically, colonialism helped developed nations to profit from developing nations by exploiting their natural resources. Today, developed nations lack the natural resources or the ability to extract them, while developed nations hoard the resources within their borders. So tie this back to my thesis statement. Again, remember that was the line at the very beginning. International borders should be eliminated and countries should cease to exist. I have to reference that again. Otherwise, whoever's reading my essay is going to be like, she went off on a tangent. She's crazy. And so I don't want them to say that. They can think that, but I don't want them to say that. So tie this back to your thesis statement. Fighting over natural resources has always been a precursor to war. International borders should be eliminated and countries should cease to exist. That's actually my thesis statement right there. In an effort to secure world peace so that natural resources can be shared equitably among the world's population. Make a general statement about your topic which can connect easily back to body paragraph number 1. So my next body paragraph, I'm talking about the United Nations. Yeah, there were United Nations. And so now I kind of need to tie in the idea we've got natural resources and the idea of the United Nations, which is a group of countries. So a statement that kind of involves both. So I said, natural resources do not belong to one land or one person who owns the land. Natural resources belong to a natural and global system, while patriotic people belong to a country. Actually reading this now, I probably could have done a better job of hinting at the United Nations. But I wanted to make it, I wanted to summarize this body paragraph. So I think I did that part well. I probably actually could have done a slightly better job of tying it into this, but anyways, there we are. So body paragraph number 3, and you're going to see it's the exact same commands, the exact same things that I have to do. So it says, write an interesting and generic statement about your topic. So patriotism, and this is, again, I found another quote, which I hardly ever do, is have this many quotes, but I don't know, I thought they worked really well. So I use them. There's no rule, like you're allowed to use quotes. You don't want to overuse them. And somebody at this point could easily say, you have overused your quotes, and fair enough, sure, guilty. But whatever, I don't care. I like them. So patriotism is fundamentally a conviction that a particular country is the best in the world because you were born in it. George Bernard Shaw said this prior to the Second World War. Now, when I was looking this quote up online, this guy was born in like 1850 or something, and he died in 1950. And so I have no idea when he said this. I could not find a time for the quote. He wrote a ton of books, but he died in like 1950. So I just kind of I kind of just made this up. I said that he said it prior to the Second World War. Well, my guess is he didn't say it in the last 5 years of his life, so with any luck, I'm right. And so that's kind of how I skirted the issue of saying he said it in this year, because I don't know. I couldn't find when he said it, but I'm pretty certain he said it before the Second World War. I'm assuming in the first 90 years of his life is when he said it. Not a guarantee, but I don't know. Bad to assume. But anyways, that's what I did. So nationalism and patriotism keep people clinging to the love for their country and blind them to the idea that they have been divided into separate countries to compete for power, resources, and wealth. So it says, reword this statement. All you have to do is find synonyms to rephrase what you just said. So I'm trying to take his idea and put it into other words. So I said, the unfortunate reality is that people are more patriotic to their own country than to the planet. Placing the entirety of humanity as less of a priority than your own nation will ensure that even if countries work together, they can never actually be together. If we are legally and politically apart, then we are ethically and humanitarianly apart. I didn't even know this word existed until I typed it today. So directly tell the reader what the topic of the body paragraph is. So it is important to consider how the United Nations, an organization that represents 193 countries, represents the desire to achieve world peace. So this is a bit of a tricky one, because I'm basically saying that we need to eliminate borders and countries need to stop existing. But at the same time, I'm bringing up an idea that on the surface doesn't seem to fit with what I'm trying to say. But I feel like eventually I'm going to hopefully make it clear how it does. The big problem here is that the United Nations, it's a great idea. It's a great group of countries that all want to come together and help things. But it's almost like the Olympics. Like, you're sending one person from your country to represent your country. It's almost like the Hunger Games. Like, you're sending someone as tribute to compete for world peace. And wouldn't it be better if, I don't know, in this analogy, this little idea here, if you didn't have to send a representative to create peace, if there was nothing to represent, would it be more peaceful? I don't know. I have no idea. But that's kind of the argument that I'm going to argue in this body paragraph. So it says, provide an example. So the United Nations formed in 1945 after the Second World War with the aim of preventing future wars. Countries around the world physically and symbolically came together to acknowledge that the world was not able to function in its current state, that it needed a governing body to manage any feuds between nations. So I had to give them some background. So first of all, people know what the United Nations is. And kind of explain what their goal was. So explain how this example proves your point. So in the post-Holocaust era, a multitude of countries thankfully had the reflective capacity to realize that without political and military intervention, countries around the world would continue to rise up and seek to oppress other nations. The UN knew that countries were quite literally not able to get along, even if millions of people died as a result of the squabbling. So here's my argument. This is kind of the point, I guess you could say, I'm trying to make in my paragraph. The UN represents peacekeeping, but unfortunately it is operating within a system of division and separateness, nation states. The UN is almost like a political Olympics committee where each nation sends a brilliant representative to represent their country in a political and military negotiation theater. So justify your argument. This is now where I'm trying to either argue or explain or clarify or add on so that my argument it's understood and it's hopefully going to be believed. So in order to achieve world peace, we need to stop having an organization that sends in representatives of peace into an arena that tries to stop nations from fighting. The problem is the existence of the separate nations in the first place. If we abolish national boundaries and dismantle the nation state, then the divisions between people break down and the free movement of people and resources around the world will help to eliminate global issues such as poverty, access to fresh water, etc. Give another example. So the problem is as I was typing this, I got to this point and I was like, I think that was my best idea. I don't have anything else. And I actually had to sit down and think, what am I going to do here? Because I couldn't call it a day yet. My paragraph was too short. So then I thought, okay, well, and again, I'm actually quite a supporter of the UN. So it was not that it was hard to write this, but I was like, I don't believe in this, but whatever. So then I thought, okay, well, has the UN ever failed? And so then, trust me, Google UN failures. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of interesting articles out there. So here's some of the things that I came up with I was able to find rather. There's a number of issues around the world that, here it is. We have the United Nations and we can't stop these issues around the world. So in a way, it's like the UN, it's not doing what it was supposed to do. It's supposed to stop, let's say, world problems, and world problems are still happening. So obviously something's not working. So this is what I found. So while the United Nations is trying to maintain world peace among divided nations, there are still ongoing humanitarian crises that the UN simply cannot stop. Afghanistan, the Congo, Central South Africa, Venezuela, North Korea, Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Iraq, and the Rohingya refugees. So explain how the example proves your point. While the goals of the UN are noble and honorable, the outcome for success is not likely. In fact, the UN has failed repeatedly since 1945 to eradicate world hunger, military advances, violations of human rights, etc. Make an argument. So the United Nations represents an idea. The idea that something isn't working in the way that the world is currently set up and that we need help, which I agree with. I really like the idea of the UN. And it's true, that's the whole point of the UN. People, they came together, countries literally came together and said, never again. We're never letting something like World War II happen again. The problem is that they're operating in a system that stops progress. So justify your argument. The existence of the UN is proof that people know that we can only accomplish peace through collectivity. Unfortunately, countries do not want to share, work together, or potentially lose out by joining with other nations. So instead of sending representatives from countries to work collectively, we need to live collectively. We need to exist collectively. So write a statement that gives the reader some idea of how important this argument is or how significant it is. I kind of want, call it a fact, call it a statement, something that's going to, make people think, wow, that's sad. The UN has held off nuclear war since 1945. The UN has not been able to hold off much else. We need to immediately restructure the way our world sorts itself if we have any chance of saving humankind. So now I have to tie this back into my thesis statement. Remember that little line at the beginning that says we need to take out borders. So international borders need to be eliminated, and countries should cease to exist in an effort to secure world peace. Sending a representative to the United Nations is not going to stop war. When each country has a military, a political agenda, a national anthem, patriotic pride, and a reason to quarrel over natural resources, it is only a matter of time before war is inevitable. So now, this is actually, I find, one of the hardest boxes to fill in is the box right before the conclusion. Because you're supposed to, in theory, tie in this body paragraph with the conclusion, but the conclusion kind of reiterates what you've already said. So it kind of feels like you're tying it backwards, which is a bit odd, but you need something so that it's not just left hanging on a cliff. It's got to be more fluid. So make a general statement about your topic, which can connect easily to body paragraph. Number 1, I should say to conclusion. The entire history of the UN has been punctuated with trying to resolve conflict after conflict. We seem no further ahead in our humanity than we did in 1945. So here's my conclusion. Optional, start with a quote about your topic. And this is something I just kind of made up, but I know it's got to be true. So in the entire history of humanity, there has never been more than a century of uninterrupted peace around the world. Like if you think about it, between ancient Rome trying to conquer, and if you think about like the Greeks, and if you think about, what was going on over in North America, and you think about, building the wall in China, like I think if you took the history of the world and you looked at it century by century, I'm sure you'll find at least one conflict somewhere in the world that humans are involved in. So this is not a fact, but it's something that I believe to be true. So I said it. There we go. So tell the reader who said it or wrote the quote and why it matters. So I'm not going to say I wrote it, but instead I'm actually almost going to reiterate it. So throughout the entire history of humankind, people have laid claim to land, sieged war on each other, or sought to benefit at the expense of others. I basically kind of just not reworded, but expanded on that idea. Write an interesting and generic statement about your topic. People literally cannot go a day without fighting somewhere on this planet. And it's true. Like if you look at, let's say, world newspapers, and you looked at a newspaper from every country around the world, my bet is that you would not find a single day in which there was peace around the entire world. So reword this statement. All you have to do is find synonyms to rephrase what you just said. So human existence has known two things: competition and us versus them. Write a statement that acknowledges the other arguments out there, but that states that your arguments are better. Something like, although cats are neat, independent, and quiet, they lack the fundamental things that every child wants in a dog: activity, affection, and protection. So we kind of want to, at some point, because if you don't address, let's say, the other side of the argument, then you look either ignorant or unaware, and we don't want that. So this is kind of my one point, and I really should be doing that throughout the other body paragraphs, but as like a basic introductory essay template, I didn't have room. But as you progress, let's say in your essay writing, you kind of want to do that in every body paragraph, address, let's say, the other side of the argument, but I saved it for the conclusion. So anyways, here we go. Although the existence of politically separate nations allows countries local autonomies and freedoms, so that's kind of the one point that I'm like, okay, fine. You can be a country, so you're not, governed by this world government. It gives you like local power. It unfortunately tells global citizens that they are just national citizens. And this forces people to see themselves not as humankind, but as separate types of humans. So remind the reader about the three main body paragraphs which you discussed by stating the three and then making an observation or statement. So this essay argued that the international border should be eliminated and countries should cease to exist. Do you see that? Like that was my thesis statement. In an effort to secure world peace, we examined how nationalism created a sense of patriotic entitlement, how separate political entities are functionally unable to share natural resources, and how the existence of the United Nations proves that there is a desire to build a better world, but an inability to do so because of international and political divisions. So many people like to conclude with a question. This is a decently safe tactic. Try to ask a rhetorical question, not a trivia question. Maybe ask a question about the future of the issue or the ethical nature of it, not a fact type of question. This is, you want to ask a question that someone's going to be like, oh yeah, I wonder. I should think about that. I should maybe look that up. I wonder what's going to happen with that. So here's the question that I wrote. And again, I'm not saying this is a great essay ending. This is an essay ending, and I kind of like it, but I'm sure there's better out there. So after considering everything that was just discussed, it seems imperative to ask ourselves the following question: which is more likely, total nation-state dismantlement or total nuclear war? The odds aren't in the former's favor. So I tried to ask a question that would make people think about not only what I just said, but about the future. And so I basically gave people two choices. I said, what is more likely, that nuclear war is going to happen, or that all countries everywhere are going to just stop being countries and be one world? And so hopefully the question that I asked is going to make people think, because that's what you want to do. Did I do that? I don't know. That's up to you to decide. But that is an essay. Is it going to get an A+? I don't know. It depends on the grade. It depends on the teacher. Kindergarten? Absolutely. This is an A+. First year university? Not quite. So hopefully this helps. And again, I would just say, like, fill in all the boxes as best as you can. And some of the boxes, it might take you longer to fill them in than others. Some might be trickier. Some you could almost write 3 boxes worth in one box. And if that's the case, well, then do that. Keep writing. The point of the stuff on the left is just to kind of give you a hint as to what should I write. I don't know what to write. It's like a hint. So anyways, I hope this helps. Good luck. And there we go. Thank you.